So there we go. Some basic facts. It's a personal letter. It was a personal letter from Paul to a young disciple. We don't know how old Timothy was, but he may have just been about your age. Most likely he was about your age, late teens, early 20s. And we know that because there's some hesitancy to put him in position. I mean, he was actually being put in charge over guys who are much older than him. We don't know if he had a family, was married or anything. Doesn't sound like it from what we understand. We know he traveled extensively with Paul in a number of missionary journeys. So then he was left behind in Ephesus, and he didn't want to be. You can tell from the scriptures he didn't want to be stuck there. Paul said, "No, you need to stay here." You can probably hear him going, "Well, I want to go with you." No, but you need to stay here. So he was told by Paul to stick behind in Ephesus to deal with some of the situations. Okay. We know that he was young. We know that he was half Jewish. He had a devout mother and grandmother. His father was a pagan, but in Jewish standards, because his father was a pagan, the father would not have allowed him to be circumcised, and the father also because the father was not Jewish, he would have been considered by pure Jews as being pretty much unclean. Okay, because the way they looked at it, you had to be Jewish on both sides, otherwise you were a half-breed of some kind. And so if the church in Jerusalem had been in existence, which by then it was already being torn apart by the revolt to Rome, he would have not been allowed to go in there because he would have to go to the court of the Gentiles. So he was only half Jewish, but he volunteered to be circumcised in maturity, okay, in order to make it easier to be accepted by the Jews that he was seeking to reach for Christ as he went with Paul to his missionary journeys. As you know, Paul, his first stop, any city they went to was synagogue, right? He was going to people he wasn't going first and foremost to people who believed in plurality of gods and had all the different kinds of religions and all the Roman temples and stuff like that. Those were side circus things. He went straight to the synagogue because the Messiah made sense to them. It was part of their heritage. They had a lot of commonality with the concept of a monotheistic faith, and so he would go there. But Timothy realized that he was a hindrance to that because it would become all about, why'd you bring this half-breed with us? So he voluntarily said, listen, I'll get circumcised in maturity. And, that's a big deal, okay? Anybody not know what that means? Okay. All right. Just checking. So I've had people come up to me quietly before and go, what is that? And then we have to have an anatomy lesson. Okay. And as here it said, he seemed to have suffered some kind of ill health because Paul advises him to use a little bit of wine medicinally. But more than anything else, he was assigned to a really tough job. So as a young guy, especially as a young person, he had a really, really tough job in front of him because there was a chaos going on in this church. Paul was off to someplace else. He'd gone in and tried to correct it, and that letter reflects the things that Paul was saying and doing. He said, okay, I laid down the law, now you enforce the law, all right? I laid down the structure of what I want to have happen. You got to make sure that happens. So that's the nature of that thing. So you can see it from this passage. After the greetings, Paul says, when I left for Macedonia, I urged you to stay there in Ephesus. Notice he says, I urged you. In other words, I twisted your arm. That's what he's really saying. In Ephesus, and stop those whose teaching is contrary to the truth. Don't let them waste their time in endless discussions of myths and spiritual pedigrees. These things will only lead to meaningless speculations which don't help people live a life of faith in God. I find this really interesting because what you have here is a group of people that would have called themselves Christians, but what they're involved in is all kinds of strange thinking, strange speculation on stuff that didn't really matter, that did more to pull people apart, that did more to create hierarchies in the church, like I'm smarter than you, I got my act more together than you because I believe this. And it was Timothy's job to get in there and silence these guys or get them on the right track. All right? So here's the situation. These new ideas had come in, and they're being introduced to the church, and they contradicted what Paul had taught them. Remember, there's no Bible right now. The Bible is in formation. They're starting to be, maybe some of the Gospels are being written. Mark is probably being written, and we don't know if it got up to Ephesus. But you have to understand, when Mark wrote that Gospel, he had to take it to a copyist. The copyist would make a copy. Maybe he'd make 2 or 3. But then they'd go to another church in different places, and those guys go, we got a copy of Mark. How cool is that? And the church up the road go, can we have a copy? So they'd have to take their copy, which is real valuable, take it to a copyist, which was like a human Xerox machine, right? Human copy machine. Hand copy another thing and take it around. And we don't know what of the New Testament. We know they had the Old Testament available, but we don't know what of the New Testament they had here. This is being built. And so the only structure, biblical structure that they understood would have been from the teachings of Paul or John, who was also in the area, or any of the other disciples who came that way, or any of the guys who hung out with them, like Barnabas and those guys. So whoever showed up, who had inside track of the teachings of Jesus, they would hear those. And by the way, we know that they had teachings of Jesus in little pieces, but whether they had an entire gospel that they could take a look at, let alone all 4 of them, for sure they didn't have John's gospel at this time. So it was real easy. My point is, it was super easy for guys to come in sideways with weird stuff, right? Because they couldn't go to a text and say, look, it says this here. They had, the only place they could go to, well, this is what we were taught by Paul, and this was taught by Peter. And so they were appealing to that. So these guys were the ultimate authorities, and it was Timothy's job to make sure that the teachings that Paul gave him while he was there were being adhered to. So Paul said to Timothy, basically, we got issues, you deal with it. And he says this, Paul says, the purpose of my instruction is that all believers will be filled with love that comes from a pure heart, a clear conscience, and genuine faith. But some people, some of these guys, they've missed the point altogether. They missed the whole point. Turned away from these things, spread time in meaningless discussions. They wanted to be known as teachers of the law of Moses. In other words, they wanted to raise themselves up as having their spiritually insight and act together. But they don't know what they're talking about, even though they speak so confidently. This is where we're going to park this afternoon for a little bit. In other words, they were ignoring the main thing. What's the main thing? What's the main thing about a church?
Jesus died to save our sins so we can go to heaven, or save us from our sins.
Okay, all right. That's
Serve one another in love and humility and be seen as people that do that, so then they get asked why they're doing that.
okay. All right. So we're defining the main thing now as our behavior towards other people, our acknowledgement of what God's done, the core tenet of Scripture. The main thing is the thing that will either make or break a church. The further you move away from the main thing, the weaker your church is going to become. And I'm telling you this because all of you are church leaders. It is your assignment. You are Timothys and Timothyets, okay? Your assignment when you leave this place is to know the main thing, to be just be laser focused on the main thing, and whatever you do in life, whether it's in a church, it's in a ministry, it's through your secular life, whatever you do in life, keep the main thing the main thing. Because once you make anything else, even a good thing, the main thing, all of a sudden the wheels will fall off the cart, and you're not going to be taking the church or the community where you're at, or the people you're talking to, or the people you're influencing, your family even. You're going to be taking them down the wrong path. So, we talked about what the main thing is. The main thing is helping people know Christ as Savior and Lord, and then helping them get deeper in their personal relationship and obedience to Him. That's the main thing. At KCF, you see the slogan on the board, to know Christ. That's our personal thing. To have an intimate personal relationship with Him where He begins to live through us, and to make that known to other people. So we have evangelism about who Christ is, and we have our own personal lifestyle that flows out into how we behave to other people. That's the main thing, okay? And evangelism is the first thing to go when the church stops focusing on the main thing. So right now, I got invited to go to a Zoom conference with a bunch of churches, and they were talking about social justice. Is social justice the main thing? It's not the main thing. You know, how much time do I want to spend? Should we have justice? Yeah. Justice is a great thing, but how much time do I want the church to be about social justice? Wouldn't it be better for social justice to be a byproduct of the main thing rather than the thing that we focus on? And there's a lot of churches that are kind of moving because our culture is creating social justice issues as big deals. So a lot of churches are following culture, and by doing that, when they do that, they lose their ability to do evangelism, okay? So many churches are involved in meaningless discussions. Many Christians involve themselves in all kinds of meaningless discussions. Give me some examples. Revelation, okay? You can spend an inordinate amount of time deciding pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib, you know? I mean, you can have fights about it. I mean, I've seen people getting big arguments with each other about it. How profitable is that? Anything else? Any other meaningless discussion?
Predestination.
Okay. Are you chosen or did you choose? You know? Churches have divided on that. There are churches that's the litmus test of whether you can be part of them. How you think about that. Okay? What your opinion is about that. Now, it's not bad to have an opinion about it, but it's not the main thing. Okay? It's not the main thing at all. Any other ones? Meaningless. Huh? Okay, old earth versus new earth. Yeah, it's an interesting point, but it's not a salvation issue. It's good to understand the different vantage points, but it's not a salvation issue that you want to spend. I don't want to go to church and spend weeks and weeks and weeks arguing about something like that. Spiritual gifts. Yeah, and what those things look like. It's not the main thing. And
Who should run the church and how?
okay, who should run the church and how? Right? All those things, now are those things stuff we need to talk about? Yeah, we can talk about them. But once they become the main thing, we're really in trouble. So when you think of this denomination on the list or a church, what feels like is their main thing? Now, you might be wrong, okay? So this is just your first impression, and we might have a bunch of different ones. But I'm going to throw up some denominational names up here. When you think of them, what is your first impression of what feels like the main thing to them?
They meet on the seventh day.
Where'd you get that from? Okay. And you guys know any Seventh-day Adventists? Okay. All right. When you meet a Seventh-day Adventist and they find out you're a Christian, what's the first thing that they want to talk to you about? Huh? Yeah. Do you keep the Sabbath? Right there, boom. That's right where they go. Okay. I went my first and only trip to Israel. I was with a kid, high school kid. He'd been into drugs. He was from a real wealthy family. Stop me if I told you the story. But he's from a real wealthy family, and he got radically saved. And his parents were flipping out because they were sweating out with this kid. He was a high school senior, and one day they came home and he's looking through a travel book, and they go, "Oh, so do you want to travel someplace?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm thinking I'd like to go traveling." And he goes, "Well, where would you like to go?" And he goes, "I'd like to go to Israel." These weren't Christian parents. And he goes, "Israel?" "Yeah." He goes, "I want to see where Jesus walked. I've been learning all about Jesus." And they go, "Well, who do you want to go with?" And he goes, "Rick." Next thing you know, I got a call from these parents. I was 25. I got a call from these parents, and they go, "You want a free trip to Israel with our son?" So sure, so signed up. And we jumped in on a tour. Everybody on the tour was a Seventh-day Adventist. They spent the entire, every time we're together at meals or on the bus, what do you think they wanted to talk to me about? Huh? The Sabbath, And they couldn't get it that I didn't care whether it was Saturday or Sunday. They couldn't get it because that was the main thing, right? And because it was the main thing, it really harms their ability to spread the gospel. Now, I know many of them are evangelical, but when your first impression is that's the same thing, you're probably not advancing the gospel the way you should. How about Bethel Church in Reading? When you think about that, what's the main thing?
Feelings?
Okay, feelings. Some of you could say music.
I was going to say worship.
Yeah, worship.
Showmanship.
Huh?
Showmanship.
Showmanship. Okay. Okay. Some people might say, most people would say signs and wonders. That's their thing, is signs and wonders. Are signs and wonders, or even music, is that ever the main thing? No, it's not. It's not the main thing. It's a sideshow, for the main thing. And when that's what you're known for, if that's when you hear somebody, if that's what you're known for, and it's not evangelism, it's something that's basically something else, then you probably got things wrong.
Tradition.
Mary being the virgin.
Confession.
Rules.
And you guys raised Catholic? Okay. Yeah. It may not be fair to Catholics to say that, because I don't know if Catholics would say that, but Protestants would look at what Catholics do and what they are about and say tradition, rules, that kind of stuff. And it's not that you can't find the main thing in the Catholic Church or the Seventh-day Adventist Church or Bethel. You just have to dig for it. It's not up on the surface, right? Okay. You Southerners know who these are? You know anything distinctive about Church of Christ comes to your mind? Evangelism? Okay. Most people who know any of you guys been to a Church of Christ? Okay. You have? What's distinctive about when you go in there?
For me, it seems kind of like legalism is very distinctive.
But why?
Because they're very tight-knit, kind of closed off, at least the church that I attended.
Did they? So the Church of Christ believes that it's wrong to play instruments in church.
Yes.
So that's what they're known for. They're known for no instruments in church. So no piano, no guitar. Everybody sings a cappella. Okay, and they think it's you're.
Where did they get that?
Where do you get all kinds of? I mean, where you can look and what they'll say to you, it's not in the. When you look in the New Testament, they never mention a musical instrument. Never mind that there's quite a few of those in the Old Testament, but I know. But that's the Old Testament, and this is the New Testament. Yeah.
Don't they believe that music is like a sin essentially?
No, because you can have music. They can have instruments in other gatherings, just not church.
They are against rhythm, though.
No, not even that. I mean, by the way, I will say this, just to give them credit. I've never heard better vocals than in a Church of Christ. Because at the time they're little, they learn how to sing in harmony, and I mean, it's super beautiful, But the legalism behind it is what they're known for. So you say Church of Christ, yeah.
So don't they kind of just consider it a distraction?
No, they consider it wrong. Yeah, they consider it wrong in church, that you're not. And they also believed in baptismal regeneration, okay, that if you're not baptized, you're not saved. So, one of the first things they'll ask you is, do you believe in Christ? You go, yeah. They go, have you been baptized? If you go, not yet. I just got saved yesterday. They go, well, then you're not saved yet. All right. So that's one of their distinctives. Okay. If the sign says Pentecostal church, what's your first thing you think of?
Emotional worship.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Flags, people running with flags. And again, this is not necessarily fair to all these guys, but there may be, some of these guys may be what they're known for, but when you get behind it, maybe running around with flags is leading tons of people to Christ. All the flag wavers in the world love the Pentecostal church, And so it may be a methodology that they're using that's actually, we just mistake for something. How about that one? Yeah, youth. A lot of people go youth, You want to know what we used to be known as? It's pretty hilarious. No.
The tent church?
No. And Kyler would know this because he was actually sitting where you're sitting when this was going on. Across the street, there's a bunch of empty land. There still is, right over there, right directly across the street. And we had the island suddenly had all these seed guys coming from. They were farmers from the Midwest, and they were coming to plant corn all over the island. It was a big deal. They're not here anymore because the anti-GMO people ran them off. But for a good 5-6 years, there was tons of corn being planted, particularly on the west side. And a lot of these farmers came to KCF, right, with their families and stuff. And Ben Sands actually is one of those guys. He was one of the guys that came here. Ben, the guy that got in the airplane accident with Rocco. And one day I'm talking to one of those guys. They go, "Hey, you guys ever done a corn maze? Have you guys know what a corn? Do you know what a corn maze? You remember that?
I lost it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I lost it in 1 year, yeah.
okay. So we said, wouldn't it be cool if we could use that field, it's 4 acres, if we could turn that field into a corn maze around Halloween and use it as an evangelistic tool to reach out to the community, right? And we found a guy who actually made corn mazes. He was a Christian guy. He happened to be a Christian guy. We flew him in. He came here like in June or something. We had the corn seed company donated all the seed, all the irrigation. The Grow Farm let us use their land. And we cut these insane, 2 miles worth of maize. And they were different every year. And people would come by the thousands. And we'd take all the vans and shuffle them over. There's like Disneyland. It was just always people just going there. And when you got out of the van, we had a whole team of people waiting. And we spent big bucks preparing a really cool gift bag for them that had cool gospel message in it and medias and all kinds of different things like that we'd hand to people to put it in. Because we don't care so much about a corn maze as much as we do about opportunity to meet people and share the gospel with them in an appropriate way. So for years, in fact, for years after the GMO guys left, I would meet people and they go, "So what church is it?" And I go, "Well, the one on the bypass, And they go, "The Corn Maze Church." That's what we're known as, the Corn Maze Church. Okay. Now, is that what you really want to be? Is that the main thing? Well, actually, it kind of was. They didn't get that it was the main thing, but we were only doing a corn maze because of the main thing, right? And so churches have different reputations and stuff like that, and some of them really end up taking them away from the core of the gospel. They become the very thing that Paul's warning Timothy about here. All right. So if you were assigned to be a leader in a church which had lost focus of the main thing, what would you do? And what might it cost you? I'm going to ask you just to spin around and just talk about that, okay? Give it 3 or 5 minutes. You're a leader in a church. They've lost sight of the main thing. You're Timothy. You're in a Timothy type position. You have some influence there. These people they're sweet people, maybe. Maybe some of them have ulterior motives. Maybe some of them just want the power, or they're hardcore on whatever their trip is. What do you do if you are a leader in a church where they lost focus on the main thing? How do you step in and do something about it? Okay? So turn around and talk to somebody. What might it cost you? One more minute. One more minute. They'd boot you probably. Yeah. Okay, all right. This is Timothy's deal. You know, Paul gave him a list of instructions. He says, get into this guy's face, don't let these guys do this, go tell the chicks this, go, you know, he's telling them what to do to try to correct the problems. He's identified the problems for them, where their main thing wasn't the main thing, or where they were going off the rails. But you've been assigned to a church, you get into this church, they hire you in this church, and you realize, oh man, we're not doing the main thing. So what do you do? What? Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how in detail you want us to get on it, but I think the first part about going into a church that's lost focus on the main things, you have to recognize the problem.
Okay.
And so maybe giving a message or just talking to the whole church community really about like what the main thing is and really in which ways they've lost focus of it. So that was Timothy. I mean, Paul really already did that. But like if you were going into a church where Paul hasn't like pre-set out and told everybody what they're doing wrong, then you'd have to do that. And then walk through like the different arms and legs of the church, right? Like the youth ministry and turn them to focusing more on reaching more kids that haven't heard the gospel before. Or like the prayer meetings, focusing on praying for the lost.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying. So actually I've seen that happen. My friend Dick Anderson took over a church that had made everything the main thing except the main thing. You know, they were all about the flowers in front and the this and that and stuff, but they'd lost touch with the gospel. And the result was, when you don't do evangelism, when there's really when the main thing isn't being held out in front of it, it feels like a social club. People get it, and they begin to drift away. And this church had gone down to about 30 people, right? And he got in there, and he knew he wasn't going to be able to change the system because they had this system going. But what he was able to do, because he had the platform to do it, every time he got a chance, he would preach the main thing, the gospel. And because he realized a lot of these people either were nominal Christians or maybe not even Christians at all. And he started preaching the gospel, and you know what happened? The church went down to 19 people. Okay, from 30 to 19. And you know what happened then? Those 19 people got on track with the main thing. They started coming to Christ. They started telling their friends. And when they hired me on as a youth pastor, they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people coming from a church that had totally gone off the rails and finally figured out what the main thing was. And he was able to do exactly what you're saying. But rather than attack all the things that weren't the main thing, what he did is he just kept drum beating the main thing, right? And there's power in the gospel. There's power in the gospel. And it's not always successful to do it that way, but I saw that actually work. It was pretty amazing.
You know how long that took?
Yeah, it took about 3 years. It was a slow growth, but once the snowball started going, it just picked up speed. Yeah. Any other ways? Any other thoughts? What you would do? Yeah.
I think you kind of just have to change. You don't necessarily have to get them to stop doing what they're doing. You have to change why they're doing it,
Okay.
and make sure the focus of why they're doing what they're doing is to bring people to Christ.
Very good. So what you're doing is how I would term that. This is how I would term it. I would say, let's ask hard questions. Let's ask hard questions. Is this working? What's the objective of this? Is it working? Why do we do this? And we go, well, we've always done it. Yeah, but is it working? Is there a way to do it better? If we want to keep doing it, can we do it better? And many churches are stuck doing things and they don't even know why they do them. They just go, well, we've always done it. And it could be something benign. Easter Sunday morning breakfast, at sunrise. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But why do we do that in the first place? It's a lot of work, time, and energy for somebody. What's the point of it? You go, well, the point of it is fellowship. Well, that's not a bad point. Okay? That could be a good thing to help build community with people. And then we might look and go, but you know what? Everybody's just sitting with their friends. So are we really achieving fellowship? And if we were going to continue to do this for the reason we want it, we say we want to do it, what could we do to make it so that you're connecting with people that you maybe don't know? And you might just have come up with devices that make people sit randomly with other people. And so they're not sitting with their friends. They're sitting with people that they don't know, and maybe there's a card on the table with some discussion questions, that kind of thing, that would begin that kind of thing. And if people go, well, we don't want to do that, we just want them to be comfortable with their friends, then what you know is that they're not really interested in the main thing, right? They just want to holy huddle with their friends. And churches do that kind of stuff all the time, right? So start asking really hard questions. And by the way, fast way to get yourself in trouble in church is ask hard questions. So why do we do that? And you don't have to ask it like, why do we do that? You can ask it, I'm curious, why do we do that? And does it work? Can you show me how it's worked? I mean, well, like 40 years ago we had, but I mean recently, how is it working recently? And we ask really hard questions about stuff, about everything. Why do we sing 5 songs, not 4 songs? Why do we sing all the songs at once? What would happen if we sang 2 songs, had a mini message, another 2 songs, had another, we ask questions about everything to see if it gets better, the main thing gets betterly, comes out better. With better focus, comes brighter. Your job is going to be to ask the hard questions. Anything else that you would do that we didn't already touch?
Kind of similar to what they're saying, but I was talking about like sitting down with probably the leaders and being like, okay, this is all the things that the church is doing, and this is supposed to be the point of why we're doing things, and so how are these things matching up? And if they're not, are they really important to just keep doing, or are they not?
Right.
Kind of what they were saying.
Okay. What might it cost you to be that person? Your job, friends, yeah. Yeah, you could, if you're a person's hired, you could be on the street, with your family, yeah.
I think it'd be hard for you to gain respect of people in the church board if you come in and tell them they're doing things wrong.
Yeah, you could be seen as a troublemaker, right?
Honestly, we had someone come in from our denomination with like a checklist. It made my brother, the worship leader, sweat every Sunday because he had a checklist that and he observed this for a couple months for the denomination, and it was like, why? Like,
Better for somebody from the inside. When you're part of something, it's easier to criticize or to ask questions when you're part of something than if you're some guy assigned to the outside. Whenever pastors come to our church, and they go, I meet them I don't know if you know any of you guys notice what I do on Sunday mornings? Yeah, but where do I greet people?
by the door.
Nope.
Up front.
Nope. If you watch me on Sunday mornings, I'm there early, and I'm inside the church, and I'm moving from row to row to row, meeting new people, right? Dane's on the outside. So the idea, by the way, this is very strategic.
I mixed up you two.
Huh?
I said I mixed you two up.
Yeah.
You told us this.
Yeah, so Dane's outside greeting people, I'm on the inside greeting people and stuff like that. When I meet pastors, I often will go, would you like a scorecard? Or what? Yeah, you get to hold up and rate the speaker this morning, It's just joke, but it's the kind of thing that you sometimes wish you could do that to learn how to do what you do better. Did we communicate this better? And we have to be willing to ask the hard questions of ourselves and of our crew. But it helps if you're in the community rather than from outside the community. Outside you can judge everything. So, any other thoughts? What am I costing? Yeah.
I don't know the thought, but I'm trying to think about how to put it into words. This more applies to today than back when Timothy was doing this. But I think sometimes it's important as a church leader to know when you're in a losing battle and be able to move on so the Lord can continue using you in the way He intends to.
Right.
I think it's important not to get caught up in one location and where maybe the hearts of those people are hardened and they're stuck in the ways of what they're going to do, and you do handle all the situations, right? Like what we've been talking about, bringing that up and continuing to kind of talk about those fundamentals and focus on the main thing. But I think it's important to have that place of recognition of knowing when the leadership is not going to focus on that and move on to a place that will, so the Lord can use it.
You can't always plug the leak in the Titanic.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just goes down. So some of you guys remember that church we went to? Some of you guys? Okay. They're whittling down to like 4 or 5 people, and they are the Titanic. Whether they're willing to make the main thing the main thing, they could turn that church around if they made the main thing the main thing, even with 4 or 5 people. But as long as they don't know either don't know what the main thing is, or I've got it the water's so muddied that everything is important, when it turns out that nothing's really important, they're destined just to go that way. And so the reason I'm spending a little bit of time on this is, first of all, it was Timothy's job to get in there and clean shop. Some of you are going to have to go home and clean shop. Some of you are going to be involved in church communities, and you're going to have to clean shop and say, we can't be doing this, we can't be doing that. It's not the main thing. We're going to lose ground by doing this. And you may pay a price. Last story, and then we'll break. I was your age. I was 21 years old, and I got my first full-time church job with a real salary. They gave me a house. They gave me a real salary. I was super stoked. I was a junior high guy. That was my job. I was Kyler, okay? And I thought, this is ripping. And I knew what the main thing was. My mentor had drilled into my head what the main thing was. And so right off the get-go, I went out and went after kids who didn't know Christ. I became the skateboard dealer. Anybody who needed skateboards came to my house, and so I had this little back business going. I didn't make a dime off of it. It was just to meet kids. We'd sneak into empty swimming pools. I shouldn't tell you this. We'd sneak into empty swimming pools and skate and do all that kind of stuff. And I started with 11 kids, 11 church kids. In a year and a half, I had 300. These are middle school kids, right? I was stoked because now their faith was on a middle school level, which is just barely above dirt, but it was, you could see the buds growing, you could see it growing. And the high school guy, they had a high school guy. The high school guy only wanted mature Christians, right? And so I would hand 100 kids to him, and he'd lose like all but 3, right? Every year. It drove me nuts. He only lasted about a year. But what was really interesting is there was all these kids coming, tons of these kids coming, with some real significant issues. And these guys had a Christian Ed board meeting every month that I had to go to because I was part of the youth thing. Christian Ed is children's, youth, stuff like that. And there's a group of guys there. After about a year, my time being there, I was there 3.5 years. After about a year being there, there's a couple guys in there that every time I'd go to a meeting, they say, I move that we fire the junior high pastor. How do you think that makes you feel? And the other guy would go, I second it. And then they'd vote it down every single month for like the next 2 years. I vote we fire the junior high pastor because they didn't like what was going on, right? It can cost you something. When I left that church and got hired on the church I was telling you about, where Hugh Ross was and this pastor that had built it from 19 people up, I was like a guy who was like gun shy, because I was always afraid I was going to get in trouble again for something like that. And instead, I got into a place where they started going, yeah, the main thing, yeah, the main thing. Whoa, okay, we're speaking the same language now. And it can cost you something. I mean, it took me a year or two to kind of come out of my shell and begin to tell them what I was actually doing, because I was afraid I was going to get in trouble, like I was getting in trouble before, yeah.
I have a question. So, say you're not assigned to be a leader, but you're a part of your church, and you notice something's going awry or not focused on the main thing.
Speak up.
And you're a young woman in a council of men, who are the leaders of the church. How would you even approach that? How would you?
I would pick the person who was most receptive and say, can we have a conversation? And see how they respond and say, I'd really appreciate this if you would bring this to the rest of the team. That's how I would do it. Kind of work that way. Because
Say that goes nowhere.
then you can ask if you could come and talk to the team. And again, rather than point fingers at them, ask them questions. Could you explain to me? Can you quantify? Can you know what I mean? Which will make them absolutely crazy. But if you're just asking real, genuine questions, guys, they'll think about that. Because everybody in leadership wants to be successful. They don't always know what that is. And again, because they haven't defined what the main thing is, they've got all these controversies and other little side circus things going. All right, so we're gonna continue this over the next course of months here as we kind of walk with Timothy through this kind of gnarly stuff. We're going to get into some of the stuff that he got into, the stuff that the church was struggling with. That, by the way, churches even today still struggle with. But I want you to know that Timothy's your friend. He's your peer. The stuff that he is dealing with was not just first century church stuff. It's got replicates that are running around in churches all over the place, maybe in your home church. And if we're not careful, those things will grow in any kind of community that we're in, and we find ourselves all about something that doesn't really matter all that much. All right? Any questions? Any thoughts? Yeah.
Isn't this Paul talking to Timothy when he says, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for the believers in life,
Right.
purity
Right.
and love."
I believe that's 2 Timothy's telling him that. But yeah, he says, because they got a bunch of old guys, and he's got to get in their grill, and that's not always welcomed. So. All right, let's pray. Father, just thank you for Timothy. Just thank you for a guy who didn't really want to be there, but knew you wanted him to be. Just thank you for the fact that he stood up in a conflict that wasn't his own, but he took it on because he cared about you. May these young Timothys in this room be willing to stand in their churches and say, why are we doing what we're doing? Is this really the main thing? We'd ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, guys.